Hey, good morning, everybody. Tim Walsh coming to you from the Fire Service Institute here on the campus of the University of Illinois. We're going to let you log in here and get set up. Chris, Downey, and I will be speaking to you in about a minute. We're going to give you a minute just to get ready. Good morning, everybody. Tim Walsh coming to you live from the Dirty Classroom here on the campus of the University of Illinois Fire Service Institute. Today I'm joined by Lieutenant Chris Downey from the Decatur Fire Department. He's the division leader of Mavis 46 Hazmat Team. We're going to be talking about PPE considerations all morning. Once again, we need your comments and questions. You can log into the fsi.illinois.edu website and go right to the portal page. From there, and you can also see all the documents that we would use just as like if you were in the classroom today. So this whiteboard that some of the older guys that are at least as old as I am, a little bit older than me, that are having trouble seeing this, we took a picture of it. It's on our portal page under today's heading for today's date, and all the handouts that we would give you just as if you were sitting in the classroom here on campus. Coming up on Monday, I'll be joined by Dan Ellis, who will be covering collaborative documents that you should be using with other agencies that are responding to the COVID-19. And the following Wednesday on April 1st at 11:30 Central Time, which is when we're delivering all these classes, I'll be joined by Chief Jim Moore, the Assistant Director here at the Institute, who's going to be talking about resiliency and how to take care of yourself and your families through this response. So we appreciate your input, we appreciate your feedback. So join us in the classroom for 40 minutes here today live, or use this later on today with your companies so that you can begin your training. I'm going to turn this over to Chris and we'll get started. Chris?
All right. Thank you, Tim. Thank you all for listening today. Today, as Tim mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about PPE considerations. I know that's been a hot topic through this pandemic, and so we wanted to kind of hit on some of those things that make the most sense for you to keep your crews safe. Obviously, that's our number one priority. Chief Hoff hit on that earlier this week, as well as Rich Stack. So PPE is one of those pieces that helps to keep your crews safe. So I can't stress that enough, is find these things out, get this information out to your crews, and have a plan. As Tim mentioned, there's going to be a couple documents that I'll refer to. You can pull those up on the IFSI COVID-19 information portal. Might be a good thing to have along with our conversation today. So without further ado, we'll get started here. I want to preface this conversation by saying the information that we're using for the conversation here with PPE comes directly from the CDC and IDPH. So these aren't guidelines that we're coming up with. They're what's best practices out there, okay? So if you don't have SOGs already for PPE use, please make sure to look at the CDC site, get the information from IDPH, put together standard operating guidelines for your crews to use when it comes to PPE. One of the biggest things is to stay on top of the information. This information, as you all know, it changes on a regular basis. We want to make sure that as time goes on and things change and adjust, that you're on top of those changes and can make those adjustments to your SOPs and SOGs. One of the things we want to look at first is PPE at the beginning of the shift. Okay, so whatever your level of PPE, and we'll discuss those things here in a minute, beginning of the shift, and I know Rich Stack hit on this on Wednesday, it is making sure that you have the PPE available, that it's in use or ready to use, that it's stored in a Ziploc bag, something that keeps that PPE from becoming contaminated, and restocking those as needed. You know, what Rich Stack also hit on volunteers. Obviously, they're not coming on shift. They're starting from maybe their home, or they're coming to the fire station. You know, the understanding and making sure that that PPE is available and ready to go is just as important for volunteer paint on call firefighters, just as important for anybody across the board. So we want to make sure that you have your PPE that's available and ready to use. And the other thing is communication. So communicating with staff, communicating with your purchasers to make sure when items and stock gets low, you're able to restock and resupply as best available. We all know resupplying at this time is difficult for some of the items of PPE, and we'll kind of talk about that. But we need to have that stuff available and make sure the staff knows to make those decisions to get the PPE once we start getting low on it. A big key thing here is communication coordination with your region, your area, right? So we know that the entire region is going to be looking for the PPE. They're going to be trying to get more stocking and those sort of things. So the communication coordination within your region ensures that the right PPE is at the right place at the right time. So hospital staff is going to need different things than the fire service is going to need. Police department may have different PPE needs than the hospital. So ensuring that those pieces of equipment get to the right spot, the right place, that coordination is going to be key throughout this. Communication coordination within the department, we kind of talked about that, but making sure everybody understands what your plan is for PPE, what your standard operating guidelines, understands the CDC, IDPH recommendations. All that's got to be a part of this. And then also communication with your family. I know that Rich hit on this the other day, making sure your family is kept in the loop. We need to understand, and help them understand what are the controls that we are putting in place so that when we come on shift, we go off shift, we're being protected and we're not bringing that virus home. So all of those key communication coordination pieces are part of this whole puzzle. So today what I want to talk about specifically with PPE is CDC guidelines. So what you see up here is the CDC has kind of broken out 3 different levels, if you will, or 3 stages, depending on what your equipment levels, availability, needs, all that are at the time. And we're probably going to fluctuate in and out of this level, in and out of these levels on different pieces of equipment based on, again, the use, the surge in your community. The surge in use in one area may be very different from another area. So as I talk through this, just understand the guidelines allow you an opportunity to move up and down depending on your needs. Conventional capacity, just a quick few definitions here. Conventional capacity, that's your everyday use. That's what we're doing on a daily basis. We know right now we're not in a lot of that with some of the specific PPE, but you may be. So things like eye protection, and we'll talk specifically about that. You may be in normal use of that. That may not be something that is at a surge level at this point. Contingency, okay, that's kind of where we are in a lot of things right now, right? So your daily practice may change, but what we're trying to do is not have a large effect on the population that we're serving. So no significant impact on the patients or patient care, and it's temporary measures due to PPE shortages. Okay, so temporary meaning, hopefully as stocks start to hopefully at some point rise back up, we can move back into conventional and follow those best practices. And then the crisis is strategies that are not aligned with typical U.S. Standards of care. So that standard of care we all have as first responders, because of shortages and things like that, we're having to make decisions, and the guidance helps us make those decisions in times where the equipment is short, there's no equipment, and it's typically that last resort. So that's kind of the three definitions we're going to work through today. We'll talk a little bit before we get into this about a couple other things. Number one, administrative controls. So what can you do administratively to help extend the life of your equipment, your PPE, okay? Number one is working with your dispatch centers to get information, gather information ahead of time before you arrive on scene, before you go on that call, to better understand what you're going into. Are you walking into something where you're going to need PPE? Is it, somebody have a fever, cough, all those signs and symptoms? Your dispatch can help you get that information so we know ahead of time what are we getting into and what level of PPE are we going to need. SOGs, we talked about that. They should be looking at how to limit exposure. So before we even put the PPE on, are there situations where we can reduce the amount needed based on limiting our exposure? So maybe we just send one person up to the house to see what's going on. They have the PPE on, they're finding out what the situation is, and then they can come back or get the information to the crews if they need more help and what that PPE level needs to be. Coordination between your fire department, police department, EMS, we kind of talked about that again, administrative control, and then following those CDC, IDPH guidelines. The second thing is engineering controls. So, how can we, what controls can we have in place to limit that exposure? So number one, distancing from patients, right? We've heard that, we've talked about that, 6 feet away, maybe need to be further, but at least having that barrier or distance between us and a patient. Barriers, if possible, we'll talk about that. PPE becomes part of the barrier. Time of patient contact. So, can we limit the amount of time that we're in contact with that patient as we deal with that? And Rich Stack mentioned that as well. So we're talking time distance shielding. For anybody that does hazmat or radiation, you've heard that term before, time distance and shielding. Nothing new here, nothing different. Rolling into PPE recommendations, okay? I know that's the crux of what we're talking about today. Number one, I just want to hit on duty uniforms, okay? So one of the big things that we're seeing out there is if you're not already, leave those duty uniforms at work, okay? Don't bring that stuff home. Go to work in your street clothes, pack those away, put a uniform on, and when you're done with your shift, switch out, take a shower if you can, back into your street clothes and bring that home. You don't want to be bringing this virus back to your families, okay? Wash frequently. So your uniforms, we need to make sure that we're washing those more frequently, okay? So maybe 2-3 times a day, depending on your situation and the types of calls and alarms you have out there. Having spare sets of equipment, PPE, your duty uniforms, okay? And then transfers. On our department, we do a lot of transferring between stations based on manpower availability and needs. It takes me a little bit to think about that I may need to bring some extra uniforms that aren't normally in my locker at my station and have those available when I'm transferred out. So kind of keep those things in mind. And same thing with volunteers, right? You're not coming in a duty uniform. So whatever you're wearing at that time, the call comes out, that becomes your duty uniform. Have a spare set of clothes so that you can change out at the firehouse. And so when you go back to your regular life, what's going on after the call, you're able to change into something that works for you. Okay, looking specifically at the PPE, we're going to talk about 4 different types that are in the CDC guidance. Okay, number one is eye protection. We're going to kind of walk through these individually, and we're going to look at what's conventional, contingency, crisis. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, you may be all over the map here with your PPE, right? So eye protection for you may not be a problem, so you're doing conventional methods. You're in that highest level, regular course of business, that sort of thing. When it comes to N95 masks, you may be contingency or crisis mode. Okay, so those are things you want to make sure that we'll see. We'll kind of walk through that and talk through each one of those.
Hey, just one quick comment for everybody that's signed on late. Please go to fsi.illinois.edu, and the whiteboard behind it is on our Facebook forum resource page, so that you can follow along with the handouts, just as if you were sitting in the classroom down on campus here. Sorry to interrupt, Chris.
No problem, thanks. So when we talk about eye protection, again, CDC saying goggles, face shield, okay? Those are the standard of care. So those safety glasses that we throw on, when we're doing regular jobs on a car accident, or we're doing overhaul, things like that, those are not what the CDC is recommending, okay? That may be something we have to get to down the road, but we should be looking at something that fully covers your eyes, 100%, so goggles and face shield. They should be disposable, in regular times, disposable, one per patient. You put them on, you deal with the patient, you take them off, and they go in the garbage, okay? When we get into contingency, we're looking at a reusable, right? So we're looking at something that, okay, now we're gonna have to use this on multiple patients. You're gonna kind of see that across the board in contingency, is that we're reusing equipment that we wouldn't normally do, okay? If we reuse it, make sure that we're cleaning and disinfecting between uses, and inspect and replace as needed in between uses. So if we use them 3, 4, 5 times and they're just not up to par at that point, we may need to pitch them, get a new one, and start over. Okay. And in crisis, our last resort, we're looking at using prioritizing. So we prioritize what patients do we need to have eye protection on. Maybe not every call we go on needs to have eye protection, or maybe only that person that's having direct patient contact would have eye protection, and the rest of the crew, maybe they're in their safety glasses. We talked about that. That's safety glasses is a crisis level thing as well. Using things beyond shelf life, and you'll see that in a lot of these crisis areas. We use things that are past their expiration date or past their shelf life date, and that may be a point that we get to. When it comes to splash protection, okay, the CDC recommendation is surgical gowns, okay? So that is what we should be using if they are available, okay? Disposable, fluid-resistant isolation gowns, single use, use them for the patient, take them off, and get a new one for the next patient. Contingency, we can shift to reusable again. CDC's recommending cloth gowns as an option that are laundered in between use. And then also coveralls. So there's a lot of discussion about using coveralls, or what I would say from a hazmat standpoint, level B, level C, splash protection. Those are recommended at that contingency level from the CDC. Just to understand, there's a few things to understand with that, and I kind of want to hit on that a little bit. So CDC recommends that those meet or exceed NFPA 1999. So when you're looking at your NFPA standards, that's the standard you want to look at. You can get those, through your regular department avenues, as well as hazmat, maintenance division teams. Remember, if you're clearing out your hazmat team of coveralls, that reduces their capability for hazmat responses. Now we may get to that, but I just wanted to reiterate that when we talk about coveralls and taking those from teams, that reduces another capability. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then I wanted to hit real quick on coveralls. I've heard a lot of discussion about Tyvek. Everybody's saying Tyvek suits, Tyvek that. Understand Tyvek is a brand specific type of suit, okay? What we're looking at is that NFPA 1999 standard, and that can go across the board to different brands. Find and use what's available. I get that. You may not have specifically a certain type, but at least that NFPA 99 does. And then when we go to crisis, extended use and reuse. So again, we're talking about wearing continuously for more than one patient, wearing splash protection multiple times. That may come into play, and prioritizing that use.
Hey, just a couple of things to point out that Chris has covered, and we covered last day too. Laundering complications for your regular duty gear, your uniforms, and if you're wearing coveralls, per the CDC, has really only changed the temperature of the water. So just wash it on the hottest setting, dry it normally, or hang it out to dry if that's a problem. If you're concerned about contaminating your washer, then go ahead and run a blank cycle in it with some bleach. 1/3 cup of bleach to a gallon of water, so a 1/3 cup in a wash cycle should be good enough. And keep your comments coming in. Refer to this forum series and share this so that you guys can provide training. We want to share this free information with fire service people all across the country. Post your comments and questions and jump into the dialogue, so it's just not me and Chris talking.
Thanks, Tim. Next one, face masks. So we're going to kind of split these two. So the CDC breaks face masks and N95 masks into two separate categories. We're going to talk about face masks, and that relates specifically to surgical masks. So those are going to be things that are designed to protect against splashes and sprays, which are liquids, okay? Conventional, we just use typically when they're supposed to be used. We can put those on a patient, okay, to not allow that transmission from the patient. When we get into contingency plans, we're looking at extended use, considering non-rebreathers as an option to put on a patient with difficulty breathing. It kind of helps reduce our need for the surgical mask, and then again, reuse, use beyond the shelf life and prioritize them. Maybe our priority is we don't have them available for the patient, so now we're gonna have to prioritize that the responder puts the mask on versus the patient, okay? Now, understand surgical masks are not designed to stop this virus, okay? That's what we're gonna get to N95 masks here in a minute, okay? N95 masks are different, right? They're a response respirator. They're a different level of filtering capability, and so we need to make sure that we're looking at two different things. N95 masks are NIOSH approved. They're approved through the FDA. They're stamped and marked as N95. So we want to look specifically for that type of a mask. Normal times, single use, right? We use them on one patient, we take them off, we get rid of them, and we move on from there. Keep in mind that to wear these, you're supposed to be trained in them and fit tested. Okay, so if you haven't already, now's a good time to get fit tested. Now, I understand fit testing in a lot of circumstances takes that mask out of service. It's only used for the fit testing. You've got to throw it away. You can't use it again. But if at all possible, you want to do a fit testing to ensure that mask fits you correctly, because there's obviously different sizes, and we want to make sure that works correctly. So fit testing is required by OSHA. Please make sure if you haven't already that you're being fit tested on those masks. And work with your hospitals and other agencies that may not have that capability and get their folks fit tested. CDC is looking at, okay, maybe we use expired masks to do the fit testing and training, because now we're not using something that's up to speed. We're using something that we can still use for that situation, but it doesn't burn our stock of good masks. Contingency, decrease the number of used. So we're hearing a lot about right now, we're keeping our own mask, we're using it for several days or whatnot, we're reusing it. That's a decrease in the number of use.
Just like Chris was saying, yes, before this virus started to take the country over, fit testing was required. Refer to your local health agency at either the state or local level and the CDC for guidance. There has been some loosening of those restrictions based upon the available stock and the way we're going forward, so that we're not utilizing masks just for fit testing. So refer to your local agency for that. Also, there was a question about wearing eyeglasses. No, eyeglasses are not proper protection. You need to wear full splash face shield or eye protection that covers your entire eyes, so no splash there. Okay, so keep the comments coming in, guys. I appreciate it. Sorry to interrupt, Chris.
No, that's fine. Extended use. We're seeing this a lot in hospital settings. It's not really practical for the fire service. Extended use meaning you're wearing that mask continuously for an 8-hour shift or something of that nature. Extended use probably is not going to fall into our category, but the reuse is going to be the big one. So that's what we're seeing right now is a lot of agencies, because of the reduced amount of masks available, are reusing those. So they're using them for an entire shift, or they may use them for a couple shifts. That's got to follow the guidelines, the guidance from CDC, IDPH, as well as your local protocols. If you are reusing a mask, when you take it off, throw it in a paper bag, put your name on it, and move on from there. The paper bag is what we want to use for storing these once we've used them. Okay, plastic bag before they've ever been touched, paper bag once we've used them. We need that mask to be able to breathe and not have an area for those germs to multiply. The other thing we talk about with N95 masks is finding ways to keep product off of that mask to begin with. So when we look at things like face shields, we look at face masks, surgical masks, those are things we can put over the top of our N95 mask as that extra level of protection, that extra barrier to keep that the splash from getting onto the mask. So that'll help extend the life as well. Anytime you reuse a mask or any of these pieces of equipment, we got to make sure that before we use them again, we're doing a quick self-inspection on them. The things aren't going to last forever, so you got to keep an eye out. Are the straps working correctly and not sprung out? Is the face mask itself falling apart? I mean, at some point that mask is going to be done. You get rid of it, you get a new one. So make sure that we're doing the inspections on that. And then the crisis level, CDC saying we can use beyond the shelf life. We're probably going to get to that at some point. Prioritize who needs masks, and when we do that, when we use them, prioritize the type of calls that you use masks on, or the patients that you're going to use masks on, or the situations that require them, And then the other thing to look at is other types of respirators. So, you know, one of the big things, unique things we have here in Illinois is the fire departments have the APRs that were issued by Mavis. So in conversations with Mavis staff, they understand that those may have to go into service. That's a local issue for you to make that determination on your own. Work through Mavis, keep them informed if you are using those things. Use those filters in operational mode, and understand it's got to be a P100 filter. So a minimum P100, which all of those filters are at a minimum that level. So that is an option available to you. PAPRs, we're starting to see a lot of the PAPRs used in hospitals. I know that's not a big thing in the fire service, but it is an option. Again, a powered air purifying respirator is an option at that level. And then obviously our SCBA. If we get to a point where we have no other option, SCBA is a respiratory protection measure that will do that. The only thing with using these other respirators, as well as, you know, some of the things with the splash protection coveralls, we got to consider the mental impact that has on your patients. Okay, if we walk up to the house in a full hazmat suit with an SCBA on, the patient's going to have an elevated level of anxiety. The neighbors that are watching this is going to have an elevated level of anxiety. So we just got to keep that in mind. I understand it may get to that point if we run out of supplies, but keep those mental impacts in mind. That mental health is just as important as the physical health.
So we posted the CDC guidelines for fit testing and reuse of N95 masks. And as we've talked to you guys before, the 2 previous days, we're not experts here. We're relaying information based upon CDC and IDPH guidance. And that's where we want you to go. That's why those links are on our portal page. You should be taking a shower, as one of the comments were made earlier today, after every patient run, right? Anytime that you're working with the public and you go back to the firehouse, that means you're probably going to have 3 or 4 sets of duty uniforms that you need, and you need to carry those duty uniforms like Chris was saying earlier. So in the wintertime in Illinois, we bring a cold weather bag. So get your Corona bag out now and start keeping extra uniforms in that bag and keep it on your rig or your POV for when you respond, so you have clothes to change into and soap to shower with back at the firehouse before you head home to your family.
Great points, thank you. And then last resort is use of non-approved face masks. So we won't dive into that too much. Again, that's guidance from the CDC, and as Tim's saying, this stuff changes on a regular basis, so you got to keep up on the information. It's going to change, especially as some of these supplies get reduced to little to none. I'm sure the guidance will change on what you can and can't do, which was a good point on the fit testing. So I want to shift a little bit to donning and doffing. Okay, obviously donning and doffing is an important part of this process. We're looking at PPE levels and making sure that we're putting PPE on. So just as we would don and doff our fire gear in a certain way, we want to do the same thing with PPE for this situation. Probably the best guidance I can give you, the International Association of Fire Chiefs has a PPE recommendation document, and the CDC has a donning doffing document that are in the information portal. So those 2 documents will help you kind of through this process. The big thing with donning and doffing, and I hit on this because I'm a hazmat guy, is technique. Okay, so the whole goal is to get that equipment on, and that getting it on is relatively easy. We just got to make sure that it's fit where it needs to fit, that the face pieces are covering what they need to cover, that sort of thing. But the doffing is the big thing. So now that we've been exposed to some sort of a product, or in this situation a virus or a potential situation, we want to doff that in a proper manner. And the easiest way I can explain that is we use a term in hazmat class called clean man, dirty man. You are essentially inside that PPE. You are the clean person, right? So the PPE is designed so that you on the inside are not being exposed to that. So when we take that PPE off, when we doff that, we want to make sure that we're not touching with our hands, our exposed hands or fingers or anything like that. We're not touching the inside of the PPE, okay? So using a technique like clean man, dirty man, like we do in hazmat, using techniques the CDC document, which is really well written, will help make sure that we're not touching the inside of the PPE level. So that's one of the big things, especially with masks and things like that. Make sure that you're only touching the outside with your gloved hands, and the gloves should be the last thing to come off. And A lot of the recommendations out there are throwing, if you can throw 2 sets of gloves on, that's even better. As supply dwindles, that may not be possible, but if you can get that extra set of gloves on, get most of your PPE off, and then use that last set to finish up and peel those gloves off, that's your best option. The key thing is when you're done doffing your equipment, the first thing you ought to be doing is washing up. Washing your hands, going through that process, getting back to the station, taking that shower, cleaning yourself up. That's part of that donning and doffing process. So again, reach out, look at the CDC guidelines. That's going to be your best bet. Decon. So kind of as we're getting close to wrapping up here, I want to talk a little bit about decon of PPE. This is a huge topic right now. So with an understanding of, okay, what do we do with our PPE once we're done with the run, we're done with the call. Some things are easy to decon, we know that. Some things are going to be more difficult, and there's some nuances here that I want to talk about. So first, I'll kind of break these into 2 areas. The first thing would be reusable devices. So reusable devices would be things like goggles, face shields, possibly splash protection, things like that, okay? Things that are easily decontaminated. Guidance is showing soap and water, warm water, get that cleaned up first, and then your disinfectant, again, as Tim mentioned earlier, 1/3 cup of bleach to 1 gallon of water, okay? So that's for those devices that are easily decon and reusable. Where there's a lot of, where there's not right now there's not such a great guidance on disposable items. So when we talk about that mask that we have, okay, the N95, surgical masks, things like that are more disposable, they're not really designed to be deconned very, very easily. And right now the CDC is not recommending disinfecting those disposable items. They're recommending that you do some of these other procedures to shift the need for those and the number of uses down to a minimum first before we get into decontamination. You'll see some things out there. Number 1, talk to the manufacturer. If you've got a relationship, you can talk to the manufacturer of those certain items. They may have guidance that will help you along with that as well.
As Chris is talking about the donning and doffing, the decon procedures for PPE, just below the question that just came in about working dirty man, clean man, are the handouts to do this. So what I would like you guys to do is click on that link while we're finishing up talking here. Print those out for your local fire station, your local firehouse, the police officers to respond with, and put those on the street. If you have the ability to print a bunch of them so that they're in every rig, every apparatus, every police car, and your locality, you're way ahead of the game. That way you can help each other on the street.
So again, on decontamination for those disposable items, talk to the manufacturer. Hopefully you've got a relationship with them. They can give you some guidance on that. If not, there's some other things that are out there. There are a lot of references or reference areas are talking about a report done by the Annals of Occupational Hygiene in 2009, a study that's saying, number 1, we're unsure how many times you can decontaminate equipment before it becomes unusable again. They're looking at options of things like putting them in the oven with warm, moist heat, 158 degrees, okay, and using that water vapor, okay, that's popped up in several areas as a viable option to decontaminate those. Using hospital-grade ultraviolet light machines. Again, that may not be as available to the first responder as some of these other options, but it is out there. Again, using that 1/3 cup bleach to 1 gallon of water, soaking the mask for 10 minutes, or the PPE for 10 minutes, and then letting it dry. Understand, though, that when you soak things that are made out of fibers, that's going to break down that equipment a lot quicker than what we normally have. And then decon hard surfaces. So Rich talked about this the other day, deconning those hard surfaces at your fire station, your fire trucks, your ambulances on a regular basis.
Mike Rakowski brings up a great point. UV light is also used, just like Chris was talking about, to decon some of these items. This is where we need you guys to go back to where Chief Hoff talked about in the beginning of the week, is sharing assets, sharing equipment across lines, not only in the fire department, but regionally in the state. Mavis is a really good asset to reach out to for PPE considerations and for sharing of tools. We have a very good mutual aid response capability here in the state of Illinois that even crosses over in Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, all our partners both regionally and on the state lines that are contiguous to the state of Illinois. So make sure that you do that, make sure that you reach out, continue to ask your questions, and Chris is going to start summing up here now what we've talked about today, but we can't stress enough from what we talked about with Chief Hoff at the beginning of the week, and Lieutenant Rich Stack and Lieutenant Chris Downey today, is you really need to communicate, and you need to get all your partners on board. Even if that's spending 10 minutes every morning, having an online meeting, whether you use Skype, Zoom, or Facebook, any medium that you can use to make sure that you're all responding effectively and together, and you're sharing information.
Great. So as we wrap this up, a couple other points real quick to make. Had some questions over the last week about PPE considerations for non-EMS calls. So those other alarms that we're going to run on a regular basis, those things don't stop, right? The CO calls, the lift assist, the gas leaks, vehicle accidents, things of that nature. Things where we're not already going to be in our, or possibly not going to be in our structural firefighting gear. The same things apply for those, okay? Limit your exposure, limit the number of people in the residence or near the patient, the resident, things of that nature. Remove the resident from the home while you're checking out the situation, maybe get them out so you're not in direct contact with them, and use PPE as needed. Reordering equipment is going to be difficult, all right? So have those conversations within your locality. Understand the process of getting equipment. You know, if you're not directly able to order it from the manufacturer, which is kind of going out the window at this point, you got to work with your local, regional partners. Those are the ones that are going to be able to request equipment through the EMA to the state, get the state help if available, and the state makes the request to the federal government. So understand that process and make sure you're a part of that process.
Another great point that was just brought up by Gail Carter, one of our brothers out on the West Coast. He's recommending that our brothers and sisters turn to the PPE manufacturers as well, so that you can get real-time information based upon those DCOM guidelines. Our brothers and sisters on the West Coast have been forwarding information to us as it relates to overview documents and how to respond. They are working with us and making sure we have real good information. So thank you, Gail, for that comment. And we'll talk about Gail and the way that they've responded on the West Coast on Monday with Chief Dan Ellis, when we come up with collaborative documents and working with all types of people in this incident. Sorry, Chris.
Nope. Great information. So again, wrapping this up, safety number one goal, right? That's what we're here for. So the PPE that you have, the procedures that your department's put together, follow those. Understand what the CDC, IDPH information is coming out there. Make sure that you use that administrative and engineering controls first. So those are the things that help us reduce the need for PPE. So those are number one. Again, the current recommendations right now, if you have them available, goggles, full face shield, okay, something that protects your complete eye protection, disposable gown, okay, N95 masks that you're trained and fit tested, and exam gloves. Okay, those are the recommendations if you have those things available. Again, IAFC PPE recommendations is a good document, a visual document that kind of helps you with that. Adjust your protocols as needed, keep up with the guidelines, and the big thing here is to communicate. Communicate locally, regionally, communicate with your partners, and communicate with your personnel so they're all on the same page.
We just got a comment from Sean O'Kane, about PPE being in short supply in Central Illinois. Sean, we can't stress enough that you reach out to your fire chief, your local emergency manager, and your sheriff to reach out to the State Joint Operations Center down in Springfield. Work with IEMA to make sure that that's identified before you need the PPE. So the PPE is obviously going to be shared across the state in the regions where they need it most, and then some will be filtered out to areas that aren't utilizing it as often, but make sure you make your request ahead of time. The supply chain takes time to fill, so you have to get your request in early to make sure that it's looked at and it's filled. Chris, is there anything else that you need to cover today?
I think we've got it. Keep your questions coming in. I know that Rich is going to talk about some opportunities to get that information back to you, and we appreciate your time.
Okay, so as we discussed when we first started today, if you have any questions about what we've done over the last 3 days with Chief Hoff, Lieutenant Rich Stack, Lieutenant Chris Downey, you can go to fsi.illinois.edu. All that information from the 3 previous lessons are on our portal. We want you to share this information. Share these videos on YouTube for people that don't have Facebook. That'll be posted today when we get done, so that you can use this as a training opportunity. We know that you have a lot on your plate right now, just making sure of trying to respond to runs and taking care of your families. So if we can take one thing off your plate by providing 45 minutes of training to the first responders in the state of Illinois as it relates to the COVID-19 response, that's our job as the State Fire Academy. Please continue to join us. We'll be here Monday with Chief Dan Ellis at 11:30 Central Time. talking about collaboration. Collaboration is huge, and we need you on board for that one. Get your sheriff in the room for that one. Get your local emergency manager. Get your hospital people. Sit down together, have a cup of coffee in a safe area, 6 feet apart, and join us for that talk on Monday. And then the following Wednesday, Chief Jim Moore will be here to talk about resiliency. If there's some other place that you need us to go in this Facebook forum series that you don't believe that we've covered, email us. Email us at fsi.COVID-19 questions. I routinely look at those questions. I've been answering questions as they've been coming in. So please, continue to be part of the conversation here so that we can help you respond. Thanks for joining us again today. This is the Illinois Fire Service Institute down on the campus of the University of Illinois. We'll see you again on Monday.